All right, so we'll say good morning. So today's daf, Baruch Hashem. So today's daf is Kuf Hey Amud Aleph, and we will begin on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. So let's begin. Rav Chananya Bar Shalmia. So it's the third line down, second to last word on the page. Rav Chananya Bar Shalmia, v'talmidei d'Rav. So Rav Chananya Bar Shalmia and the Talmidim of Rav. Havuyasvi b'su'udasam. We're sitting and having a su'uda. V'koi alayu Rav Hamnuna Saba. And Rav Hamnuna Saba was attending to them. As we already pointed out 2 days ago, this was often the case where you had these meals of Talmidei Chachamim, and one of them would agree to serve the rest. So what happens? Amrulei Zil Chazi Imakdish Yoma. So they said to Rav Hamnuna Saba, do us a favor, go out and essentially see if the day has become sanctified. Now, the Rashbam points out they're having this meal on Erev Shabbos, and the meal is going for a while. So he says to Rav Hamnuna Saba, go out and see Imakdish Yoma, if Shabbos has begun. If Shabbos has begun. And if that's the case, nafsik, we will stop, v'nikav'e l'shabsa, and we will reestablish our meal for the sake of Shabbos. Now look at the Rashbam for just a moment. So Rashbam says, v'nafsik ba'kiras shulchan. Now when they say we'll stop, what they mean over here is literally we'll remove the table. And the Rashbam says, b'shabsa, and then we'll go ahead and we'll resume eating l'shem Shabbos. L'shem Shabbos. Okay. So what happened? Amar Lahu, Rav Hamnuna Saba said to them, Lo tzrichaso, you do not need to go to these measures. Shabbos kava nafsha. Shabbos establishes itself. Now look at the Rashbam again. First one line in the Rashbam. Lo tzrichiso, lahafsik ba'akiras shulchan. You don't have to go ahead and stop the meal by removing the table. Kedei lahavdil bein sudas chol sudas Shabbos. Now what was interesting over here is the following. What these Rabbanim felt was, look, obviously we have to stop. And in order to reestablish the meal for Shabbos Kodesh, we somehow have to make some type of dramatic stoppage. So to go ahead and remove the table. So Rav Hamnuna Saba says, no, it's not true. You don't actually have to do anything. Well, we'll see, anything doesn't mean anything, but it means you don't have to remove the table. Why? Because Shabbos establishes itself. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam again. The Shabbos hi kava nafsha, the su'udasa. Shabbos establishes itself for meal purposes. Deme'achar shehi. Good. Deme'achar shehi oseres alinu le'echo me'ata b'lo kiddush. Because here's what's interesting. Once Shabbos begins, you are not permitted to eat without kiddush. Ein lecha hefsik godol mizeh. There is no greater hefsik than this. So simply by the arrival of Shabbos, that creates a distinction within this meal itself between the weekday meal and the Shabbos meal. Rather, so what do you need? You don't have to remove the table. Now, what you do need, we spoke about this before, is prisas mapos, to cover the table. Because again, as we've said before, covering the table, by the way, covering the food on the table, is a normal din in Su'udah Shabbos, right? We saw that before. That's part of the reason why part of the reason why we cover the chalas on Shabbos. The idea of prisas mapa is to go ahead and say that to show that this su'uda is in fact l'kavod Shabbos. So it says Rav Hamnuna Saba, you don't have to remove the table, just simply cover it, make kiddush, remove the cover, and poof, you have su'udas Shabbos. Back up top to the Gemara. Do Amar Rav, because Rav said, Kashem shah Shabbos kol va'as l'maiser, kach Shabbos kol va'as l'kiddush. Because Rav said that the same way that the Shabbos establishes itself for maiser purposes, so too Shabbos establishes itself for kiddush. Now what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam again. Kashem shah kol va'as l'maiser. The Rashbam writes, Perish, it's actually interesting halacha. Perish achilas aray the Shabbos chashvi osa keva. We'll say the halacha is like this: before you have a fully processed grain or fully processed grain, you're permitted to go ahead and eat achilas aray. You're permitted to eat a snack from it, even though, again, you haven't tithed it. However, again, once food is fully being finished, fully processed, you can't even eat a snack without going ahead and taking trumos and maestros from it. So what the Gemara is saying over here is Shabbos is something very interesting. That on Shabbos, at least halachically, there's no such thing as snacking. On Shabbos, everything you eat, one would argue the opposite, right? But on Shabbos, everything you eat has the status of a meal. as such, you can't go ahead and eat from any kind of untithed produce. Again, even though you'd be able to snack on that item during the week, Shabbos, so what Rav is saying is the same way that Shabbos establishes acts of consumption as a meal, so to what? Shabbos establishes a meal as a Shabbos meal. So look at the Rashbam. Kashem shekavas lemaiser, perush achilas harai de Shabbos chashvi osakeva lemaiser. Even a snack on Shabbos is considered to be like an established meal for the sake of meiser. He quotes over here from Seches Beitza, Mishum Dahavi Oneg, because the idea behind that is that since Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of oneg, and part of the way that we fulfill the mitzvah of oneg is through su'uda. Therefore, by definition, every act of consumption becomes choshev. Afilu su'uda kol shehididei keva hu ve'in ochlen b'Shabbos afilu aray mitvua shlo nigmura malachta l'maiser. Therefore, again, you will not be able to eat even a snack from an untithed, fully finished produce item on Shabbos, because Shabbos converts every act of consumption into a meal. Therefore, El Imkein Isram Erev Shabbos, fine. Therefore, the same way Rav says that Shabbos is kova'as l'maiser, kach Shabbos kova'as l'kiddush. Look at the next Rashbam. Sha'asra lit'om ad sheyikadish. Because the halach is once Shabbos starts, you are not permitted to eat anything. You are not permitted to eat anything before kiddush at night. Alma. So what is Rav showing? What is the Gemara showing? The Gemara showing that once Shabbos comes, by definition, Shabbos converts all meals into what? Into Shabbos meals. You don't actually even have to do anything. The only thing you actually have to do is what Rabbi say is make kiddush. And once you're making kiddush, you're poris mappa. You place a cloth over the table, and that's enough to convert the meal. So the Gemara says, Savar Minei, so we'll say we are on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines down from the top. Savar Mina, so we'll say again, so what we have over here now is you have these Rabbanim sitting and eating. They started the meal Friday afternoon. The meal extends already late into the day. It's Shabbos, or it's close to Shabbos. They want Rav Yemar Saba to go out, check, has it become Shabbos already? Because if that's the case, they're going to remove the table, make Kiddush, and then bring the table back in. Rav Yemar Saba says, you don't have to do that. Why? Because you don't have to create a Shabbos meal. Shabbos creates the Shabbos meal. And the only thing you need to do is poris mappa, spread a cloth over the table, and make a Kiddush. So the Gemara says, Savramina, they inferred from this, Kiechi de kavala Kiddush, kach kavala havdalah. Now, I will say, we can make the logical assumption that the same way that Shabbos establishes the meal, meaning that the same way that once Shabbos arrives, by definition, that converts the meal into a Shabbos meal, albeit you have to go ahead and first make Kiddush, so we would assume that the same process applies to Havdalah. Now, what does that mean? Look at the Rashbam. Kova'as l'kiddush, the same way that Shabbos kova'as l'kiddush, sha'asar lit'om ad she'ikadish, that you can't eat anything until after you make Kiddush. Alma, mishechashecha hichashuva achila Shabbos me'ela. So just like Shabbos converts the Friday afternoon meal into a Shabbos meal, and now again, at this point in time, you can't eat anymore without making Kiddush. Kach kova'as l'avdalah. Listen to this. Kach yitzi'asa kova'as l'avdalah. I would assume the same process applies to Havdalah. What does that mean? Shem yoshen ala shulchan. So let's say they're sitting and eating a meal. Shalosh this. I'm sitting and eating shalosh this, and what happens? Vichashecha b'matzei Shabbos, and now it gets dark. Aser le'echol ad sheyavdilu. I might have thought that's what? That it is aser to eat until I make Havdalah. Va'af api shelo ifsiku sudasan. Poris mapa umavdil sheitzias Shabbos osartan ba'achila v'kovatan Havdalah. And I will say the halacha is that once Shabbos is over, you're not really allowed to eat until after you make Havdalah. So I might have thought the same logic applies over here. The same way that when Shabbos comes, by definition, Shabbos establishes that Shabbos, that meal as a Shabbos meal, and that creates now a stoppage. Why? Or a cessation. Because now I can't go any further until I go out and make Kiddush. So I might have thought it's the same on the back end of Shabbos. That's when Shabbos is over, even if I'm in the middle of a meal, I have to stop. Because now once Shabbos is over, then what? It's time for Havdalah. Once it's time for Havdalah, you can't eat without Havdalah. So I have to be poris mappa, place a cloth over the table, make Havdalah, and then if I want to continue the meal afterwards, I continue the meal afterwards. To which the Gemara says, Amar Luhu Rav Amram, Hachi Amar Rav. Rav Amram said no, but that's actually not the case, because in fact what Rav said was the following: L'kiddush kol va'as velo lahavdala kol va'as. It's not true. It's not true. Rav actually said that Lemaisa, this process only works for Kiddush, but doesn't work for Havdalah, meaning it's the arrival of Shabbos that transforms the meal into a Shabbos meal, and by definition requires prisas mapa, spreading of a cloth over the table, and then the recitation of Kiddush, but this same process does not apply to Havdalah. Look at Rashbam again. Rashbam says, Havdalah eina kol va'as, which literally means Havdalah does not establish, meaning Havdalah does not establish at the meal. The end of Shabbos is not established at the meal is over. Because remember what's happening over here. When did I start this meal? I began this meal while it was still Shabbos, during the day. Therefore, what? Zehu kavod Shabbos, shehei gomer su'udaso afla achar shehichshich. Then what? That is, bless you, that is considered to be Suda Shabbos, kavod Shabbos, to continue the meal even after it's dark. Ula achar shegamer su'udaso yavdil. And after you finish your su'udah, then you'll make havdalah. I will say, obviously, we also know, the Gemara will get into this later on, there's the concept of Tosefah Shabbos. There is the concept of adding on to Shabbos. So by definition, again, remember, the idea the Gemara is making of, look, there's an idea of Tosefah Shabbos on the front end also. But at the end of the day, if you don't start Shabbos early, you don't start Shabbos early. But at some point in time, Shabbos is here. So Shabbos transforms the Su'udah upon its arrival. But again, Lamaisa says the Gemara, there's Havdalah, or there's the end, the technical, we'll call it calendrical end of Shabbos, does not actually create an end of Shabbos itself. Therefore, there would be no obligation to be Poris Mapa on Shalosh Udis and make Havdalah. We're going to qualify this right now. V'hani mili. So let's analyze this. So when do we say that you don't have to stop if the meal extends into Matzei Shabbos? V'hani mili le'inyan mifsak lo mafsekinon. This is talking about if you've already begun a meal. Right, so meaning if I already washed, or I already, the truth is here, we'll see if it has to be washing or not. But as this, I already started the meal when it was still actual Shabbos. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. V'hani mili, there's a couple of V'hani mili Rashbams over here. So we're just going to V'hani mili, da'havdalah eina kol va'as, la'afsuke su'udasa, aval aschuli lo maschalinon. So when do we say that Havdalah does not create a halachic end to the meal? That's when you've already begun beforehand. But I both say if it's already dark, aval aschule lo maschalinon. But if it's already dark, you would not be permitted to go ahead and begin a meal. Because at that point in time, once it's dark already, then what? Then technically speaking, that it's already the time for Havdalah. Once it's already the time for Havdalah, then what? Then you can't eat without first making Havdalah. Furthermore, says the Gemara, so caveat number one is you have to have started during the day. Caveat number two, umifsak lam nami lo amran ella ba'achila aval b'shtia lo. So furthermore, says the Gemara, that the concept of stopping, or the concept of not stopping, is in eating, right? That if you're already eating, you don't have to stop. But if all you're doing is drinking, then Lamaisa, that you would have to stop when the time of Havdalah arrives. Ushtia namilo amran ella bechamra v'shichra. And furthermore, when we speak about stopping of drinking, that's only for something what? That's only for something like alcohol, like wine or beer. Also, you should understand when the Gemara talks about beer, by the way, just stam Babylonian beer was date beer. Was not grain beer. Not important for this sugya at all. Just an interesting point. I'm sorry? They say it was excellent. So the Gemara says, and actually, interestingly enough, now that we started on this, it's kosher Pesach. It's kosher Pesach, number one, and apparently it's much more what's the right word? More intoxicating. I get potent, right? The intoxication qualities were much higher than the Israeli counterparts. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Aval maya leslanba," but to drink water, that we don't care about. So even this idea, so now the Gemara is just qualifying all these ideas. So even when we said that when it gets dark, you can't begin to drink, that's a drink. That's drinking a chashuv drink, like wine or beer. But water, we don't care about at all. Meaning, what that means is that even when it's dark, if you want to drink water, that's fine. Upliga d'Rav Huna. And this argues on Rav Huna. Because what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna chazye lahu gavra deshasa maya kodim havdala. Rav Huna saw a particular individual who was drinking water before Havdalah. And what did he say to him? And he said, Amar le lo mistafi mar me askura. Is mar is a deferential title. Is the master, is referring to this individual, not scared of contracting askura? We'll say askara usually is literally translated as diphtheria, right? This disease that ultimately causes constricting of the throat. People chas shalom die by suffocation. So what's interesting is so sometimes the Gemara uses this not necessarily literally. Doesn't really mean what it means is the Gemara sometimes uses askara just as a term to connote that a person is going to die by unnatural means. So apparently Rav Huna saw this man drinking before Havdalah, and he said to him, "Are you not scared of askara?" Rabbi said that would seem to infer that Lamaisa drinking even water before Havdalah is not a very good idea. Okay, the Tana Mishmeid Rabbi Akiva, because it was a Tana that turned the name of Rabbi Akiva. Kalatoim klum kodem sheyavdil misasa ba'askira. That whoever goes ahead and drinks or tastes anything before Havdalah, chas v'shalom will meet a death of askira. However, Rabbana debei Rav Ashi lo kapti. But the rabbis of the Academy of Rav Ashi were not makbid on this. Lo kapti amaya. We're not careful with water. They didn't drink other things, but with water they didn't feel that there was such a hakpada. So both you should know, interestingly enough, these are both halacha l'maisa. Meaning, first of all, by the Friday afternoon case, that in the event that l'maisa Shabbos goes into, your weekday meal goes into Shabbos, which again, it's not really matzah. It's not really matzah. I think you mentioned a couple of days ago that where this happened most often in times of the Gemara is that people got married on Erev Shabbos, and what would happen is people would have weddings on Friday afternoons, and then the wedding meal would be ultimately the Shabbos meal. So they begin the meal on Erev Shabbos, and they'd go into Shabbos. And I mentioned that in Eretz Yisrael this practice is coming back, not for afternoon, but now there's a popular trend to get married on Friday morning. When I was in Eretz Yisrael this summer, I did my first Friday. I never did a wedding on Friday morning before. It's an interest. So first of all, it's cheaper because it's breakfast. Essentially, it's breakfast. So it's not right. Nobody's drinking as much. So it's an interesting. So again, that's why because we often wonder to ourselves, how are you ever going to have a case of it's strange to us to think that you're going to have a Friday afternoon case going into Shabbos. It's not so crazy. You daven mincha beforehand. Remember, Ma'ariv later on, you could daven later on also, whenever they're davening Ma'ariv. And the idea was, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that the way you would conduct yourself in such a case is poris mappa. You'd simply place a cloth over the table. You need not bench first. You just go ahead and place a cloth over the table, recite Kiddush, remove the cloth, and suddenly again you're in the midst of your Shabbos meal. Interestingly enough, in that case also you would when you bench, you insert ritzei. Even though, again, you began that meal during the week itself. Now, again, big machlokes by benching, which we'll discuss in terms of when the character of benching is actually forged. But that's your Shabbos meal. By Havdalah also we pass. Now, again, same, but however, on the back end, so we know Shalosh Shudas could go as long as you want. As long as you want. Havdalah is not kovaz, as we'll discuss. However, again, one must make sure to begin one's meal. We try to be makbid before Shkia, before sunset. Because remember, after sunset already, you get into a lot of halachic ambiguity with time. But even immediately after sunset, but sometime before it gets dark. And the truth is, once the time for Havdalah comes, we are makbid to try to refrain even from drinking water. That we try to refrain from any acts of eating or drinking once the time for Havdalah has actually arrived. Okay, so says the Gemara. Well, we'll see this more later on. I'm just tying up those loose ends for you. So the Gemara says, fine. So Ravina asked Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the following idea. Mishalo kidesh be'erev Shabbos. Interesting shayla. Let's say for some reason you didn't make kiddush on Friday night. That's what they call over here Erev Shabbos. Literally, Erev Shabbos doesn't mean Friday. It means the night of Shabbos. So someone who did not go ahead and make Kiddush on Friday night, so can he go ahead and make up that Kiddush the rest of Shabbos? I will say you have to understand something. There's really only one Kiddush on Shabbos. Right? Because, again, Kiddush, Shabbos day is not real Kiddush. It's what we call Kiddusha Rabbah. It's Rabbinic Kiddush. And it's really just Brei Priagafen. That's what it is. We tack on a couple of psukim onto that, but it's just very Gafen. Ikar Kiddush is Friday night, because we make a separate bracha of Kiddush of Mekadesh HaShabbos, separate bracha of Kiddush, and this is the Gafen. So Shiloh say, for some reason, I didn't make that Kiddush Friday night. Can I actually recite that bracha of Kiddush on Shabbos day? So the Gemara says, Amalei. So this is Ravina asking Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Amalei Mida Amri b'nei Rabbi Chia, from the fact that the sons of Rabbi Chia said the following: Mishalo hivdal b'matzei Shabbos, mavdal v'holich kol Shabbos kulo. Rabbi Say, sons of Rabbi Chia said that if somebody did not make kiddush on matzei Shabbos, what can you do? Rabbi Say, you have makeup havdalah, right? And when ultimately makeup havdalah extends all the way until when? Until Wednesday. Until right when he says kol Shabbos, the Rashbam points out that really what it means is until Wednesday. Hachanami, so I would say over here, Mishalo Kiddush be'erev Shabbos, Mekadesh v'holech kol yom kulo. So I could make the argument that the same way that there's a makeup for Havdalah, that there should be a makeup for Kiddush as well. Obviously not until Wednesday, but Lemaisa at least through the rest of Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, Esvei, Leili Shabbos v'Leili Yom Tov, Yesh Ban Kedusha Alakos. V'yesh bahen haskara bebirkas hamazon. So we'll say, listen to this. So now the Gemara quotes a brisa, and this brisa is going to pose a question. So right now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak wants to suggest that the same way that there's a makeup for Havdalah, there's got to be a makeup for Kiddush as well. So what does the brisa say? The night of Shabbos and the night of Yom Tov have Kiddusha alakos, have Kiddush, and they also have an insertion in benching. Shabbos v'Yom Tov, the day of Shabbos and the day of Yom Tov, Ein bahen kiddush alakos. There is no kiddush alakos. So also again, remember what that means is there's no formal kiddush. There's a bracha brei priya gafen with some psukim, but there's no formal bracha of kiddush. The yeshvarim has karav birkas hamazon, and there is a special insertion for the identity of the day. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. So also what the Bryce is simply saying is, when is there kiddush? At night. Kiddush at night, no kiddush by day. The Gemara says, well, 1 second. But if it's really true that somebody who did not make Kiddush on Friday night could make up that Kiddush throughout the entire day, then what? Shabbos v'Yom Tov nami mashkachas luhudi yesh bohen Kiddusha alakos. Then what, Rabbi Say? It would turn out that Shabbos and Yom Tov do have Kiddusha alakos. That Shabbos day and Yom Tov day do have Kiddusha alakos. When? Di'i lo kidesh ma'arta mikadesh lamachar. Because if you did not end up making kiddush in the evening, you can make kiddush the next day. Now, so what is the Gemara asking? The Gemara is saying like this: the Brisa makes it sound like there is only kiddush at night and no kiddush by day, under any circumstances. Now the Gemara says, but that's not a true statement. It could be a circumstance in which there is kiddush by day, and when is that? If you didn't say Kiddush at night. So the fact that the Brisa does not even entertain that possibility indicates to us what? That obviously that assertion or that assumption is flawed. That if you miss Kiddush at night, maybe there is no makeup during the day. To which the Gemara says, no, don't read into it. The Gemara says, Amar Lei, he responded to him, Di'i lo katani. I will say, sometimes when a Brisa states a halacha, a Brisa just states the halacha in the pure form. A Brisa doesn't state the halacha in the what-ifs, because again, you can't start listing all the variables. It comes to it's a little bit complicated. So the Gemara just says, the Brisa is not talking about if you did not make Kiddush on Friday night. That's a separate halacha. But so all the Brisa is talking about is in the purest form, there is Kiddush on the night of Shabbos, on the night of Yom Tov, and no Kiddush during the day. But the Brisa doesn't disprove the fact, or doesn't contradict the fact, that if you missed Kiddush at night, then what? Then you indeed can make it up the next day. So the Gemara says, Esvei. The Gemara says, fine, we'll raise another kasha. Kavod Yom, over Kavod Laila. So we'll say, here's something very interesting. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, Kavod Yom, Kavod Laila. The Rashbam says, Im ein lo yayin harbe lesuda. So, mine megadim. So we'll say, listen to this. Let's say you have limited wine, or you have limited food. Not necessarily even limited food, but limited good food. Limited nice food, bakavadik food. So what happens? So we'll say, so now the shayla is you don't have enough for the night meal and the daytime meal. So what should you do? So the Gemara says, kavod yom v'kavod laila. When it comes now, remember, the concept of having a nice meal on Shabbos is part of the mitzvah of kavod Shabbos. Kavod Shabbos, right? Remember, there are Kavod Shabbos is an overarching motif of Shabbos, and underneath that umbrella is oneg. Oneg is enjoyment, and part of the way we enjoy Shabbos is through a seuda. So the Gemara says Kavod Yom v'Kavod Laila, Kavod Yom Kodem. So we'll see why all this is later on. But again, if you have a choice between Kavod of the day or Kavod of the night, Kavod of the day wins out. Right? So meaning that Oneg Shabbos of the day is more important than Oneg Shabbos of the night. And therefore, practically speaking, if you only have a limited amount of wine or a limited amount of food, you save that for the daytime meal. All right.
Also, if you have plenty, but just the better food is you.
Correct. So we'll discuss. You can make kiddush on challah in that circumstance. We saw that already in Maseches Brachos. We'll see that more here. We'll see that again here.
So 2 great bottles of wine, save the better wine for Kiddush Day.
Save the better wine for Kiddush Day. Correct. So the Gemara says, again, we'll clarify these halachas, exactly how they play out. So the Gemara says, V'im eino ela kos echad. Now, if you only have 1 cup of wine, so both say, this is all, in the previous statement of the Brisa, ultimately, again, you have, let's say, enough for both, but it's a shaila ultimately of what gets the better. So what gets the better is the day. What happens if you only have 1 cup of wine? V'im eino ela kos echad, omer alav kiddush hayom. Kiddush hayom, mipnei shekiddush hayom kodem lekavod. So we'll say, listen to this. However, now we're going to get confusing over here just for a moment with what this wording means. If you only have 1 cup of wine, so what do you do with the cup of wine? You use it for kiddush hayom. Now kiddush hayom means Friday night. Right, so if you only have 1 cup of wine, then again, which makes sense. Why? Because Friday night is the Iker Kiddush. See, even though again the real din of kavod, that the obligation of real kavod Shabbos applies during the day, but the mitzvah of real Kiddush is ultimately at night. Take a look at the Rashbam. It's the Rashbam, first Rashbam. Kiddush Hayom, Kiddush Halayla. That refers to Kiddush of the nighttime. Shemekadshin es Hayom al hakos balayla. Kodem lekavod yom. That ultimately the act of making kiddush alakos at night comes before the kavod of the day. Shelo yishta osa ba'osa be'emtza suda el yikadish bo balayla kodem echil. I will say there's an interesting tension, because on one hand you would say like this: the cup of wine represents what? An opportunity for kavod Shabbos, because by drinking that wine during the meal, you're going to enhance your enjoyment of Shabbos. So it would seem to be, and remember, what did we just say before? That the kavod of the day is more important than the kavod of the night. But yet, on the other hand, that cup also represents your opportunity to be mekayim the mitzvah of kiddush, and kiddush laila, kiddush at night, is more important than kiddush during the day. Kiddush Midoraisa is Friday night, but Kiddush ala kos is Dirabanan. You can fulfill your Kiddush Midoraisa by saying Vayichulu, right? But Kiddush ala kos is Midrabanan. So we're dealing with all Dirabanans over here. So the Gemara says the following: V'imis and Arbasa. Listen to this fascinating argument. So I'm sorry, let me finish reading it. So Kiddush I'm called the Kavod, because again, Arbosai in our hierarchy, so as much as Kavod Yom comes before Kavod Laila, Kiddush Laila comes before Kavod Yom. All right. Now look at the Gemara suggests a fascinating suggestion. V'im Isa. Now V'im Isa means, and if what you said before is correct, if what I said before, if it's true that if I miss Kiddush on Friday night, I can make it up on Shabbos day. Then I'll give you a great suggestion. L'shafke ad lamachar. Don't make Kiddush Friday night. Leave it till Shabbos day, v'le avid be tarte, and you could get both. What's the both? You'll get kiddush and what? And you'll also get kavod. Right? So put yourself to, again, remember, this is only true if it's really true that you can make up kiddush that you miss on Friday nights. I have a good idea. Now this wouldn't be called missing. This would be called an active deferral. But go ahead and actively defer kiddush until the next day. And this weekend, on that 1 cup of wine, you're going to get kiddush because you can make up kiddush, and also because you're drinking it during the daytime seuda, you'll get kavod. You'll be physically enjoying the Shabbos as well. To which the Gemara says, Amarle, no. Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, because it is very near to us and dear to us to do a mitzvah in its correct time. The
point is like that if they let that happen, people would just actively
avoid. It could be. So the Gemara says over here, chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, that again a mitzvah done in its correct time is an even dearer mitzvah. Look at the Rashbam. It's the first part of the Rashbam. Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. K'damar be'elu dvarim. Shahari hektar chalavim ve'ivarim kishem kol halayla. Ve'in mamtinon lahen b'shabes ad shetechshach. So all the Rashbam is talking about over here is that, again, we actually learned out that concept earlier with the concept of the burning of the sacrificial fats. That even though it could have been done throughout the entire night, they didn't wait until nighttime to do it. They did it even earlier on. So chaviva mitzvah b'shaita means that if you have the mitzvah, this is a corollary of Zrizin Makdim and the mitzvos. All part of this same motif that we don't defer mitzvos. Again, we've seen already, yes, when you're under duress, when you have no choice, if you have to defer, you have to defer. But assuming there's no duress, we always try to do a mitzvah in its appropriate time. So to actively defer Kiddush till the next day, even though by doing so you're going to chap another mitzvah of Kavod Shabbos, that we don't do. Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Gemara says, 1 second. But we learned. If somebody enters his home on Motzei Shabbos, what happens? We saw this almost 2 days ago. Mevarich ala yayin, va'ala mor, va'ala besamim, va'achar kach omer avdala akos. Remember, you walk into your house on Shabbos night, on Motzei Shabbos, and what's the order? The order is you make hagafen, borei ma'orei ha'ish, borei minei besamim, and then the bracha of Havdanah. Well, so obviously we already know already that reflects a view of Beis Shammai. We Lamaisa, of course, reverse it. We first say B'samim and then Eish, but that's okay. This is according to Beis Shammai right now. And then you say Havdalah. And remember, what did the Gemara say before? What did the Brisa say before? I will say, remember this case? That what happens if, again, Lamaisa, I come home, and now what? I need to make Havdalah, but I'm also going to have Malava Malka. And what? I only have 1 cup of wine, which means that if I use that cup of wine, what's going to happen? I'm not going to have a kos for birkas hamazon, for benching. So what do I do in that case? Manicho ad la'achar hamazon, o mishalshalon kulon la'acharav. So we'll say, what did the Gemara tell me to do beforehand? And what did the Gemara tell me to do? The Gemara said, okay, you know what I do in that case, Rabbi say? I come home, I eat malava malka, and then what? And I do all of the brachos afterwards. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. So I eat. I have malav malka. I bench over the coast, and then what happens? And then after Birkas Hamazon, I do yayin ner b'samim v'havdalah kibei shamai aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. And I will say, what does that show me? V'hachi mafarshi lekamei v'lo amar chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. And I will say, what does that show? Now remember, when I got home, what was the time for? It was time for Havdalah. And yet, what did I do? I deferred. First of all, I did a couple of interesting things. First of all, I ate, which is interesting. Right, I'm sorry. So obviously this is not going according to the previous sugya. But Lamais again, I sat down. I had Malava Malka, I sang Zemiros, I said stories about Tzadikim, right? All the things I do at Malava Malka, and then what? And now I go ahead and then I bench, and then after I bench, I go ahead and I do Havdalah. I'm finishing the Rashbam, Da'avi B'Shas Havdalah. So both again, and back to the Gemara, V'lo Amrinon, Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. So what are you talking about over here? So meaning, again, Lamaisa, don't tell me Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, because if that was really true, that we try to do whatever we can to a mitzvah in its right time, then you know what? All right, you're not going to have a kos for benching. No. There are times you don't have a kos for benching, but better to go ahead and do the mitzvah when it's right time. So listen to this. Remember, both say this is all a discussion. This is all a discussion between Ravina and Rav Nachman. Ravina is asking this from Rav Nachman. So comes along Ravina and says the following. 1 second. Right, comes along Rav Nachman and answers. Right, comes along Rav. So Rav Nachman says something very interesting. He says, Amarle. So Nachman says to Ravina, Ana lo chachima ana velo choza ana. I'm not a scholar, nor am I a prophet. Now look at the Rashbam for just a moment over here. This is amazing. Lo chachima ana, lo amina la midatoi lahad chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. I am not espousing my own wisdom when I tell you this concept of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Velo chozah. Lo chozah literally means magid. This is a good, not a conveyor of information. Like a magid was like a There's a better word for it. Yeah. Okay. V'lo chazik v'lo. Let's just read the words. V'lo amina la mishmei de gavri yechida. I'm not telling you something over in the name of one individual. V'lo yechida ana. I'm not telling you just a solitary opinion. Ela gamarna v'sadarna ana. I'm going to tell you what I am. I am someone who learns in yeshiva, and I am someone who has his teachings very organized. So right. So Nachman was saying is, I'm not espousing my own wisdom, nor am I telling you again one solitary lone opinion, nor am I telling you something I dreamed up. I'm telling you this: I learn in yeshiva, and I know my stuff. And I'm telling you, v'chein morin bebeit midrasha kavasi. So Nachman says, Ravina, you could bring all the kashas you want. I'm telling you what they are saying in yeshiva is this is what they're saying: chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. So I'm sorry. I don't know where he is. So the Gemara says, shiny lun. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So look at Sadarna Ana. Misader shmuasi lifnei rabosai. I organize my teachings in front of my teachers. Velo gamarna ana ela misadarna ana. So we'll say the concept also misadarna refers to someone. So you have to understand something, that these are the days when Torah Baal Peh was really Baal Peh. So Lamaisa, what does that mean? It means that you had to make sure that you really had your learning in order. So people would chazer, they would review their learning much more often in front of their Rebbeim to make sure they had everything clear. So Nachman says, Ravina, I'm telling you that what I'm saying is correct. Furthermore, the Gemara says, shiny lon bein iyule yoma la'afuke yoma. There is a distinction between when Shabbos enters and when Shabbos exits. Why? What does that mean? First, let's take a look at Rashi. Iyule yoma. Rashi says, "Mechavivin lei." We want to welcome in Shabbos as quickly as possible. Va'avdin kidusha me'arta ki heche dilenakte iluyon haya chaviva mitzvah b'shaita uzrizin makdim el mitzvah. So we'll say the Gemara says another distinction. Meaning, remember, also what we were saying before is that this case that the Gemara brought before about Havdalah was seen to contradict the notion of chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Because what the Gemara is allowing me to do is come home and defer the mitzvah of Havdalah until later. But if indeed chaviva mitzvah b'shaita is correct, then what? Then I should make Havdalah immediately. To which the Gemara says you have to understand there's a difference. When it comes to the entrance of Shabbos, we want to bring in Shabbos as early and as quickly as possible, and therefore that's when we say Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. Zrizin Makdim El Mitzvah. Look at the Rashbam. Once more, we love the Shabbos. Va'avdin kiddusha me'arta. We make kiddush as soon as it gets dark. Kihechi dilenakte iluyan. In order to bring it upon us. Haya dechaviva mitzvah b'shaita. This is what it means that we love a mitzvah in its right time. Uzrizin makdimin lemitzvah, and ultimately we display a zrizus, a certain quickness to do the mitzvah. However, afuki or my next Rashbam kegon havdalah ma'acherin lehechan da'ashkechan shum alila la'achure. We like to defer the official exit of Shabbos as long as we can. Kigon hecha de'in la'elakos echad dema'acherin le'ad la'achar hamazon. So we'll say Gemara gives a fascinating answer over here. So let's read this in Gemara again. Shiny lan bein iyula yama lafukim. There's a difference between the entrance of the day and the exit of the day. Iyula yama, when the day enters, kol kama demikadminan le'adif. The more you could hasten the entrance of Shabbos is what we do. Now, Bosai, that's how the Gemara explains what. That's why, even though if I only have one cup of wine, there might be a good logical argument to what? To making Kiddush during the day. So therefore, what could I accomplish? I can get both the mitzvah of Kiddush as well as what? As well as Kavod Shabbos. Since there's a din of Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, we do Kiddush on Friday night. However, Afuke Yoma, when it comes to the exit of Shabbos, Ma'acharin Rabbi said there's a concept of deferring the official exit of Shabbos as long as possible. And therefore what? And therefore again, the Gemara says, in order that Shabbos should not look like a burden. Tuna is Aramaic for a burden. That if you're looking at your watch, if I'm looking at my watch and mamish, I'm just ready to start Vurachum, right? Punkt at the time that Shabbos is over, it looks like I'm rushing. Where are you rushing? Where are you rushing? Why? What's the rush to go ahead and leave Shabbos? So it says the Gemara, we try to defer the official exit of Shabbos as quickly as possible. And I will say, now why is that important? Because that helps explain the 1 cup malava malka case. That's why if I come home from shul and what? There's only 1 cup of wine. So what do we do? See, what about chaviva mitzvah b'shaita? So the truth is, it could be that Havdalah is the exception to that rule. That even though we say chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, there's not a chaviva mitzvah b'shaita by Havdalah. Why? Because there's another mandate by Shabbos, which is to delay the official exit, even though Shabbos is over as a function of time. But there's a concept to delay the official exit of Shabbos as long as possible. So therefore, in this now again, under normal circumstances, we won't. Under normal circumstances, if it's time for Havdalah, I'm not going to sit down to eat Malava Malka first because I can't eat for Havdalah. But if I have this one case where I only have 1 cup of wine, then in that case, what will we do? We will delay the official departure of Shabbos so as to enable me to go ahead and bench alakos as well. So the Gemara says the following: Shema mina, mehamas nisin tamni. Both say there are 8 things that we learn from this particular. First of all, so you should just know that halacha l'maisa we do paskin that in the event that you missed Kiddush on Friday night. So let's say a person wasn't feeling well. This happens. A person went to sleep early on Friday and they just didn't wake up until Shabbos morning. You would recite Kiddush on Shabbos day. You have to recite Kiddush over Shabbos. Ideally, we do it Friday night because Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. But if for some reason you did not, you would recite it during the day. You are starting from Yom HaShishi. Yeah, those are psukim. That we don't. I don't want to say we don't care about that. The ikar is the bracha of Mekadesh HaShabbos. Yeah, if you want to say Yom HaShishi, you could do Yom HaShishi also. Doesn't matter. So the Gemara just says, well, we'll say it's just interesting. Shema mina mehamas nisin. Shema mina mehamas nisin tamni. We learn 8 things out of this brisa that we just spoke about before. Number 1. Hamavdil b'tfilas rashi avdal akos. Number 1 is that even if you made Havdalah during your davening, you have to go back and make Havdalah ala kos. I will say the way the Rashbam points out is the reason we know that is because the Brisa said Hanichnas labeisa b'matzei Shabbos mevarich ala yayin. So Hanichnas labeisa, where are you coming from? Where are you coming from? You're coming from shul, right? Where else are you coming from? So you're coming from shul. So apparently you daven, you said Havdalah in tefillah. Yeah, you still have to say Havdalah ala kos. Number 1. Number 2, Shema mina bracha tuna kos. The next thing we learn is that what Rabbi say that the bracha or birkas hamazon requires a kos. That we see because if you're coming home at night and then what, you only have 1 cup of wine. We defer Havdalah until after benching so that you can say Havdalah ala kos ushma mina kos shel bracha tzarich shir. You know what else we see from here? That a kos shel bracha, which means a kos that's being used for a mitzvah, requires a shir. I will say, how do you know that? Because otherwise, it's 1 cup. Otherwise, if it didn't need a shir, split the cup in 2 and use part of it for Havdalah and part of it for benching after Malava Malka. Shmamina, hamevarich tzarich shiyito. What else do we see? That when you go ahead and you make a bracha ala kos, you have to taste it. How do we know that, I will say? Because otherwise, what could you have done? Made Havdalah ala kos and just put it down, just not drink it, and then use it again for birkas hamazon. Obviously, you have to drink from it, and then what happens? Once you drink from it, it becomes pagum, right? We saw this before, it becomes disqualified for any further use. Ushmamina, this is the next case. Ushmamina, tamo pagmo. Furthermore, what do we see? That once you drink from a cup of wine, you can't use that same cup for another mitzvah. Ushmamina, ta'amavdil. What else do we learn? We learn about that as much as you're not supposed to eat before Havdalah, even if you ate, you still what? You still make Havdalah. Meaning, don't think that just because you eat, therefore, again, you've obviated the mitzvah of Havdalah, you still have to go ahead and make Havdalah. Tab of Kovav, Ushmamina, Beis Kiddushos Alakos. What else do we see? That you can go ahead and make 2 brachos on 1 cup. As is evident by what? You're doing both birkas hamazon and have done 1 cup of wine. And lastly, ushmamina beis shamahi va'alibud Rabbi Yehuda. And also see that apparently we paskin like beis Shammai according to Rabbi Yehuda, which said what Rabbi say that lemaisa the order is first ner and then bisamim. So by the way, we'll see some of these 8 things are halacha lemaisa and some of the things are not lemaisa. The Gemara is just saying that from the Brisa we learn out these 8 principles. We'll see tomorrow which ones we accept.
So we learn from the blemished situation that's right. This is what we learned, that people are very machmir about making sure the cost that they use for Havdalah or a second time is very clean and has nothing, like no remnants in the
well, no, remnants are not really a problem because as long as you're adding new wine to it, you're okay.
So I've seen people like
just out of covet for the bracha.
so